Welcome back, everybody, to the agenda for the work session on January 28th. We're calling ourselves to order, and we are going on to general business. The first item before us will be the Given Memorial Library construction drawings and bid process update. Who is carrying the ball on this, Doug?
Yes. So included in the packet was the most recent construction drawings. Those have been submitted to our TRC, Technical Review Committee in the village. So they are currently looking at that, and they hire an engineer to look at it as well to make sure everything's in line. And so as soon as that process is complete, actually it doesn't even need to be complete, but we wanted to have an initial review by the TRC so that we would have some idea if there was anything out of order that we could address before we went out to bid, because we didn't want to have any major change orders in the project. So that process should conclude in the next couple of weeks, and then we can bid it out sometime in February. So that's really the update, but I am more than happy to answer any questions. I know we have some members from the Given Tufts organization here as well, and obviously Audrey's here, so she can add anything if she wants to as well.
Council members, any particular question you have at this point?
No, it looks good.
And you said in the final version, I think you said there'll be the path that's just not shown now. Will be
Yeah. I didn't want them to hold up the project just for that, but that is something that we'll work with the landscaper to put in. But yeah, so we talked about it, I believe, in November, adding a path to get from the back to the front. If someone didn't want to use the lift, or if there was a mom with a stroller, something like that, to provide different opportunities to get in.
Okay. And I gather the sewer and bird issues have been resolved?
Yes. We did find the sewer line.
Is it active?
Yes, yeah. It based on the drawing, it should have been like at ground level, and it was like 2 feet down. So.
All right. I have no other questions or comments there. Is anybody else? Seeing and hearing none, we'll go on to general business B, a discussion regarding adding 2 associate neighborhood advisory committee positions for representation from ETJ neighborhoods. Doug, you're going to give us an overview on that, or?
Yeah, and it's really simple. We had the request. In the past, there was a representative from the ETJ on it, but about 2 years ago, we kind of revamped the NAC. And at that point, the decision was made not to include the ETJ. And I think the reasoning behind it was that, they're really not members of the Pinehurst proper. We really only control land use in those areas. And so it was thought that, it might confuse them if they're coming to NAC meetings, and the thought is that, we can provide the same services in the ETJ as we do the regular.
Yeah, I did not recall that they were ever on there. So when I
We had one.
That,
I don't know how active she was and how much she attended, but
okay.
Really, I'm fine either way on this issue. I don't.
I tend to like the idea because I always want to see as much public participation as we can have in our village committees and so forth. I'd like to hear other thoughts, and also because it does, depending on participation from some, we've got 3 vacant spots now, and then the others, sometimes it's a 90% turnout and sometimes it's not. So hopefully would increase a little turnout. Any other thoughts on this?
I would say I'm definitely in favor of bringing on representation, whether it's an associate member or a member. Needs to be kind of determined. But given what's going on with ETJs, our focus on those, given the fact that we've had efforts and successful efforts for municipalities having ETJs taken away from them, or considered doing that because they weren't being fairly treated, I think reaching out to that that group of residents would strengthen our relationship, and I think that would be a tremendous benefit. In reading through the policy document around the administration of NAC, you get into voting issues and so forth, so I think it would be good to delineate associate member versus a representative. But that would mean kind of rewriting a.
Yeah, I think my intent was that as an associate member, they could participate in the discussions.
Yeah.
They really wouldn't have a vote, although the NAC doesn't make a lot of votes
Yeah.
anyway.
Then there's the whole issue of membership too, which has been rather complicated by the new policy. And it's one thing when you're drawing representatives from a pretty big pool of people, but that's not the case with an ETJ. So there might be some reconsideration there.
And I don't think we need to necessarily throw this out and start over, but I would also be open to just an open town hall type forum where, you know, hey, meet with the mayor and the manager once a month and you could talk. But I mean, that's always a possibility
From a
out there.
resident's perspective, it kind of, the homeowners associations are an important part of our residential neighborhoods, and that structure is very helpful, in my opinion, in NAC, and it's a good communication link. If you let that go, I'm not sure what sort of disorganization and dissemination of information would look like.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
I think the NAC is, I think it does serve a good purpose. There's obviously some more active than others, but that's the nature of volunteer organizations. Other comments, Jack?
No, I agree with Barb 100% on this one here. I think besides the reasons she mentioned, I think it's a way for, I believe many people in the EDJ feel, if you ask them where they live, they might say Pinehurst. Even though they are not actually legally in the municipality. I think the association that they have to the community and to Pinehurst is important, and I don't think we want to push that aside. I think we'd like to nurture that the best we can.
Yeah, sorry, to that point, I just want to, and I think it'll actually help if there is a member of the ETJ on it, but like, we're not allowed to spend money, we can't send patrol cars out there, we're not picking up their trash, so if we can just make that clear that, you know, you are not receiving these services.
That's a good point.
You're an associate member. Yes. Dr. Morgan, thoughts?
I support it for a variety of the reasons there. The other part of it is just philosophically, ETJ has to abide by certain things that we do put out. Not a lot, but they don't have representation that they're voting for. And I would like to see them have more of a voice. So.
Don, any comments?
Yeah, I think in a lot of meetings, they will have no report, but a lot of our existing neighborhoods or full members have no report, so that shouldn't be a disqualifier. And given the, I don't mean that as criticism, there's nothing going on. It would appear to me that over the next several years, if anything, there may be more issues that intersect with ETJs or not, and beginning to have them be able to establish a chain of communication with other residents in the ETJ could become useful. So I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I share everyone's thoughts. What's our next step? Do we make
So we have an
announcements?
NAC policy, which we just need to amend slightly to include this, and at the same time, we'll start advertising.
Okay, so that'll be on the next meeting? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, we got the action item there. All right, item C, update on enhanced enforcement of ordinance 2215 for short-term rentals. Go ahead,
Yes.
Doug.
Yeah, this was a request from a council member, and so I'm happy to kind of let you lead by question, but I do want to provide a little bit of an update to start with, that we are working on implementing the software program that will help us better monitor STRs in our community. Until that's really in place, we're going to have a difficult time identifying them and notifying them or tracking them. So I do have the timeline. We had our initial discovery phase completed in December, and we are working with them on this design and development phase. As soon as we get to the education phase, maybe there's a little bit of a shortcut we could take. We could focus on this and make that timeline maybe slightly shorter, but the ultimate deadline would be April to have this up and running.
What is UAT? Under education, in the timeline,
Client training and then UAT.
UAT?
Thank you, Dana. User acceptance testing. I mean, who doesn't know that?
Well,
Me either.
It's just the elected officials here.
And what is RAM Light?
RAM Light stands for, I forget exactly, but that is the monitoring system. So if you got the RAM high-tech version, that would allow us to follow the taxation of it. And since that is not a Village of Pinehurst function, we did not get that upgrade on that.
That might be something at some future point that the county would be interested
Yeah,
in.
I think they are moving forward with that. So that's the update on the software system. Some of the other questions that anyone who has received an NC or applied for an NCUC and did not receive one because maybe they didn't have all their information
Yes.
together, they've all been notified. It should be very clear that they are not approved.
Oh, they have been notified.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to see that letter, if we can share that with, not right now, but.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe just send an example around. Okay, that's good. I did not know they had been
I
notified.
mean, it was kind of a case-by-case basis for each applicant, but we could get a sample one.
Yeah, I mean, it's either they are or they aren't,
so
qualified.
additional, if additional documentation is provided, then what? And is there a timeline for that additional information to be submitted?
So if they had contacted us within the first year after adoption and there was some missing information, I think we would still accept it. I really don't think there is anyone out there that is in this category that reached out to us and just didn't have the information. I think there are some that started, realized they may not even have the required documentation, and so they just kind of faded away. But as far as my knowledge is that there's no one actively trying to find the document to submit to us. So the 365-day period has ended, so we are not issuing any more NCUCs.
But Doug, even without an NCUC, a property can still be a previously non-conforming, and it's still non-conforming, which is fine. We just let it be non-conforming as long as we acknowledge that. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And to point number 4 here, there are also people that did receive an NCUC that potentially haven't been using it as an active STR sometime within that 365 days, so they are really not conforming at this point, or
Right.
conforming, non-conforming.
I do think it's worthwhile to list the properties that did receive an NCUC, whatever status they may have fallen into. The fact is the village sent a letter. They have something from the Village of Pinehurst that says you are an NCUC, your property. And I think that'd be worthwhile to list on the hot topics, since it's not likely to change much, but at least if someone's wondering what's going on there, they can look up the property.
Yeah, I want to caution us a little bit. I mean, anyone can go on to the Excel system and look up whether or not an NCUC was permitted at that location. But at this point, an NCUC doesn't tell you whether it's able to be operating as an STR or not.
Right, but-
So it means very little.
Is there a way to link to the Excel system?
Yeah, we could do something like that.
Well, let's make it, again, user-friendly for the person or persons who are curious about a house they may be thinking of buying, or a house down the street from them, so that they can look it up quickly, and it may answer their question one way or the other. Either I want to buy that house, or I don't want to buy the house next door to it, or whatever it is. It's at least some information that's authoritative, because it's providing documentation from the Village of Pinehurst, who went through a process, and these people, 277 properties, went through a process to get that letter. So I'm,
I have a little bit of concern with that, and I share that with Doug. I'm not sure exactly what we would accomplish there. Plus, it's a fluid situation. I mean, they may or may not have applied for a NCUC, or they may or not have one. And even if they have one, they may suddenly, because they haven't used it or rented the house in 365 days, they've sort of become non-conforming anyway. So it's a very fluid situation. I'm just a little curious about that. We start putting a list of things on the website that could be misused.
well, one, it's public information, because the village provided it. Two, it's somewhat fluid, but it's actually pretty stable. The number 277 hasn't changed in a year. Now, you're right, some people may no longer be opening their home up for an STR, but that's their,
That's true, I can see that, yeah.
so, and if someone is shopping and wondering, though it's not a definitive answer to someone who's thinking about buying house X, if they have an NCUC house Y next door, well, they know that's for certain, that house does. It doesn't mean that they could still be a STR house and they don't have an NCUC, but at least it's a partial answer. That's my point.
And
I guess a concern I have, your sentence, last sentence under this is, we will rely on the software system to monitor compliance. So the bottom line, it sounds to me like, as of today, we don't have a way of updating our NCUC list. And when we get software will identify some of this, we would be able to update it.
Yeah, well, so an NCUC is just if people applied and they were issued a non-conforming use
it's
certificate.
a fixed number, it's not going to change.
Yeah,
correct?
that's not going to change. But yes, when the software is in place, we will have a fluid list of who is currently, I don't know what the right word is, can legally operate an STR in our community. That will change potentially monthly.
Or are advertising and may not be legally.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we will have that information as well.
Which may be better than.
Yes, if we were going to share some information, an accurate list of who is appropriately operating STR and who is not, or who is would be better than sharing the NCUC list, because that is fluid. I mean, because that, you received it, but it could expire.
So I would say we hold off and do something that is more accurate and reflective of.
Yeah, and again, you can look it up now, so we can make it clear how to do that in Excel.
I'm fine if we just make it clear so it's user-friendly to how they can get to the Excel permitting. I had one very minor edit to the draft letter to property owners, ABC Drive. I think it's all very well written. I would want to add reference to the ordinance number and dates for those items, those ordinances that dealt with noise in unruly gatherings. Because in the rest of the letter, we're citing 2215, so a person can look up that ordinance. But previous councils have adopted, and I can't remember the numbers, but they did adopt one on noise, unruly gatherings. So I think we should include that in the letter. So again,
Yeah, I think that is good feedback, that we can put the actual reference so people can look it up.
because it's there forever. That's our reference point. Okay, that was my only comment on that. Let me see what else we had here. Unless someone wants to cover something else, item 5, ongoing internal communications and reporting on the progress. If there are further specifics you're seeking on this topic, please let us know so we can address it more clearly. Other than the Excel permitting link and the minor edit, I didn't have any others. Does anybody else? Barbara, did you, or Jack, or Dr. Morgan?
I didn't have the chart, but it clearly tells me from looking at this chart that we will have information that we will be able to generate reports on a regular basis once we get further into the implementation.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's fine.
Revisions to FAQ sheet. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, we have the FAQ sheet. It did on there list how you could apply for an NCUC, but since that time period has expired, we have updated it and removed that. But the other information on there is still accurate, so it still works.
The only thing I think we ought to, well, we'll get another update, but we ought to consider down the road, as I mentioned this in the past, I think at some point, we need to provide an option for people to apply for an NCUC prior, if they had an STR, prior to the adoption of 2215, so that if they're eligible, they can receive an NCUC, but only if they've had a STR prior to the October adoption of 2215. And we ought to address probably anything else, whether it's bed and breakfast or it's anything else in the ordinance itself that we just didn't address in the past. I know we talked previously about the I can't think, the on-site unit, the in-laws suite, or whatever we want, what are those things are?
Accessory structure?
Thank you.
Accessory dwelling, excuse me.
Accessory dwelling. So that's sort of an open question. What's it?
Homestays.
And homestays. So
Somewhere in there's a reference
we
to
probably ought to revisit that, simply because it's sort of hanging out there.
I think the homestay may be part of the PDO, UDO process. I would think.
Yeah, we can go back and relook at it. I do think for bed and breakfast and homestays, our language is pretty good. But again, the PDO will look at it, so
Yes.
we'll have outside eyes looking at it, and we can look at it internally again. But when we discussed this in 2022, we were very comfortable with that language.
Remind me, in 2215, is homestays?
No,
No,
not
they're
addressed.
not.
No,
And-
but there is another section of the PDO that
In the
specifically-
PDO? Okay.
When the planning board forwarded its recommendation to the council about this ordinance, besides the recommendation about the ordinance itself, the STR ordinance, they specifically stated that the homestay issue should be set aside for the moment and revisited later. I believe that's sort of the wording that was forwarded. Is that correct?
I'd have to
I'm
confirm,
sure
but
it is.
that seems
It-
to ring a bell.
Even though at that time it was in the PDO?
Well, there is a bed and breakfast in the PDO.
Yeah.
Okay.
And everyone defines homestay a little differently, so
Correct.
we need to define that in our PDO. But which I think, I mean, bed and breakfasts definitely are. So anyway, we'll take a step back, look at bed and breakfasts, all hospitality-related uses, and make sure they're meet our needs.
Well, we can do that the next time we review an update on this. Does anyone have any other questions?
Just more of a statement here. When you talk about relooking, I think you need to relook the strategy on the rollout here. Reason for that is that, and I've mentioned this before, getting into a fight's expensive, and getting into a fight and losing is very expensive. And we were given specific legal counsel to not be a test case. You currently have Iredell County. They're in a case right now, and it's about the state constitution and whether it allows property rights. They were sent to mediation in December, and they did not come up with any agreement on that. I don't know when they're going to go back into it, but I don't know how it's going to be solved. I'm not a lawyer on there. But with the rollout and the enforcement of this, we are putting ourselves as a potential test case. And we were given specific guidance that we don't want to be a test case, okay? Because you can potentially lose there. You may win, but you potentially will lose that. And you have somebody else who's already fighting this. And to wait a little while and let them go through that and have the test case be settled may save us a whole lot of money in the long run. We've had short-term rentals here since 1895. Let's just go 1900 or something. But we've had them here for a long time, and an extra 6 months to let this get settled seems like a wise approach versus going in there. The strategy is important. We had a situation where the village won litigation by the courts on a case involving Mr. Drum. It still cost us $90,000. Could we have rolled that out differently? Well, now nobody here was on that. Could it have been handled differently with a better strategy to not put us in that position? And I'm telling you right now, we need to be cautious, okay? We are putting ourselves up to be the test case, which could be very expensive for this, and we don't have to do it.
Well, first of all, I think the issue of the case that Mr. Drum brought against the village of Pinehurst and some particular previous members of the council, as well as some staff, the courts proved us correct. I think it was worthwhile that we stood our ground on that, and we won. And he didn't even pursue the next step, which would have been his eligibility to even appeal it further. So I don't think that is even on point. I don't have a concern that we may or may not be some test case while there are other cases ahead of us. So far, we've adopted this over 2 years ago. No one has sued us, though they threatened continuously that they would, but no one has. The legislature has not decided to pass any law to restrict what we've done. And thirdly, we had an election where the voters reaffirmed their belief in the ordinance that we had adopted. So I don't have reluctance for us not to pursue whatever we can pursue and what we should pursue and what, most importantly, we told our residents we would be doing. We all know that when we do that survey from ETJ, the thing that keeps popping up year after year after year is a concern of residents that we're not enforcing codes. And if we don't enforce a code, then why do we have a code? So I think we should pursue what we're doing right now, the software, the letters, the website, and if someone wants to say, you're wrong, I'm going to take you to court, well, let's stand up for our residents and our ordinance. Will we get another update when? You think in a month, Doug? Will there be more to share in a month?
Maybe in March we can share, after we've had a chance to use the system a little bit, we'll have an opportunity to.
Okay, maybe we can put it down for the first meeting in March? Okay.
Doug, I had a more technical question regarding it was actually in many of the letters that you provided drafts of, talking about under a general statute that existing bookings may continue for up to 180 days from the date that we notify someone. So if I'm operating an STR, whether established pre-2215 or afterwards, but you think I'm not, and I don't provide you additional information, any bookings that I have stay on the books for 180 days, and then thereafter, that would only be the point in time in which we could actually take action.
Yeah, to specifically address that 100-day issue, I talked to legal counsel, and He doesn't think that Vacation Rental Act applies to this situation, and neither did I. So I think we want to confirm with, running around some legal circles, but I don't think that will actually be a part of the letters that we send out.
I'll make it edited out.
Yeah.
I withdraw the question.
And one thing, I was looking for a note and I found it. The Iredale case, one of the problems they're facing is they authorize literally something they call a zoning permit. And one of the things we've steered clear of throughout this is using the word registration or permit anywhere. And the rationale, at least in my mind, for doing that is because those words seem to me very interchangeable, and council has advised the delicacy of those words, permit and registration, and by not using them, we're not drawing attention to something that the Wilmington case basically said you can't do that. You can't register, and we know it's not legal to register. And then some communities got into the, sort of the cute approach of, instead of saying registration, let's call it a permit. Well, I don't think there's much of a difference, and nor do I think that's something I'd want to risk or test. Okay. All right, shall we go on to item D? Discussion of the council's capital budgeting and decision-making process. Councilman Taylor, you have put this on the agenda and you've circulated some things. You want to lead this, and should we have Dana come forward?
Probably, because hopefully I will not get into trouble with the numbers, but I might.
That's
So
fine.
I'm sure if I do, she will straighten it out. I'm kind of combining two thoughts here and emphasize that I don't think as a result of this conversation, which I don't think will be that long, and nor am I looking for any specific action tonight, but rather setting the stage as we work through both the budgeting process later this year, which will include a 5-year capital forecast, and candidly, much sooner than that, we are going to get bids back on the library. And we all hope they will come in line with what we are hoping for, but they may not. And I'm marrying that to an email that I received, and I can't remember whether it was copied to everyone on the council or not, but it was from a former member of council, and the tagline was, "Do something with my money." So I was struck by, as Doug was reviewing the status of a number of things, how long many of them have been on the docket without a formal decision being made. I'm going to exclude, although it's listed on here, the Station 93, we know there's an ongoing Birdie. We'll get that apparently next month, and maybe that will then put us in a position to actually formally make a decision one way or another. But I think I think it's a valid criticism of council in general, not just the year and change that I've been on it, but past, without pointing fingers at any individual, that we have the resources to do things which could be construed as being in the public interest, and kicking the can continuously down the road or putting something out beyond the 5-year horizon because we don't want to make a decision. If we don't have the information, that's one thing. But otherwise, why don't we set the criteria that we would need to make a decision, whether that's a Birdie or something else, so that we can come to an agreement and actually get some things done. Doug had sent out to me the list that you see here on the screen, and I just asked that he sort it slightly differently between those things that have been discussed before, and I pulled off from this things like the $460,000 we allocate to sidewalks every year. I view that more as in the operating budget as opposed to the capital budget. And that's more a semantic decision than it is an accounting decision. So, walkways and multimodal paths, I'm kind of disregarding that, but we have the library and the archives, the ladder truck, the pumper truck, Station 93, West Pinehurst Phase 1. I only included that because we did have funds that we reallocated from that to do the work that's now ongoing and I assume approaching completion at Cannon Park. At Camelot Playground. Then the second section there are things that either have been on but have been dropped off for some reason, and I think ought to come back into the consideration, particularly as we move through the budgeting process. So the public services plan, and we'll have a little something more on that in just a minute. The downtown parking garage. We haven't solved parking. It's a problem. There's possibly some other things that we could do. Costs are unknown. But I think that we can be more systematic in the way we approach this and ultimately get to the point where we actually make more decisions than we have historically made. And so I would stop there for the moment and just open that up for other comments.
I think the criteria for making decisions will vary considerably based upon the item. For example, the third fire station and the ladder truck and so forth, particularly the third fire station, we may see a number, a projected trend line number that indicates clearly for adequate or reasonable response times, we need to do that. I mean, versus some other things such as, I'll just take the parking garage as an example, that may be for an assessment as to whether or not we've reached the pain point downtown in the parking situation. So I doubt that there's going to be a number.
Jack,
know,
I agree
that's
with you
gonna-
that one size does not fit all, but whatever the project is, I think we can establish what the criteria are to make a decision. Maybe it's a birdie process, maybe it's not. I agree with you on the fire station. That is possibly going to be a little bit more cut and dried because we kind of have an idea that went through a birdie 4 or 5 years ago, came up with a staff recommendation not to pursue it at that time, but the situation has changed. The
But there's a
number of calls have
metric, there's a
gone up.
metric we want to accomplish with our response time, for example, and
But I think part of that metric was whether we're servicing fires or emergency calls. That was the big difference. The fire calls, I don't have it in front of me at the moment, I thought that was 4%. But the emergency calls were what we really had to service, which is,
well, we can wait for the results of that birdie, but
Yeah,
I think it's
it's
more,
just a
it's
different
more
facility.
metric-based than some of the others.
absolutely.
And in the case of Cannon Park, we believe we save money in the long run. We believe the field becomes more usable more often, less susceptible to weather.
Yeah, there may
and
be metrics associated with that,
Yeah,
correct?
and so there were definitely metrics associated with the budgetary side of it, but there were sort of what I would call non-pecuniary factors that we were able to, so we kind of laid it out 1, 2, 3, and initially we had that out 2 or 3 years from now, and the question was if that was the higher, or my recollection is, that was the higher cost item, and if we believe that things only get more expensive the longer we wait, why not accelerate that and do it? And I think the lighting got pushed back just a little bit farther as the lower cost. So whatever the criteria are, and I agree, it will be different. I mean, the other implementation items for the Parks and Rec Master Plan, I don't know that we've sort of figured out what those would be. We probably need staff input from that, and then we will all chew on that and come up with what we need. But to not have a process that says, how are we going to decide whether to do this or not do it? And if we're not going to do it, kicking it down the road, why don't we just kill it? We've already got an excess of theoretical demand for capital versus the amount of capital we currently have. Taking things off if we're not going to do them facilitates actually accomplishing the things that we're going to do. And so I think we can just be more so the goal of raising this is to make us be more disciplined in what's on here and why should it stay on for more than a year or more than a year and a half. None of us in our personal lives do things that way. We decide to do it or don't do it, and I think we could take a lesson from that. I recall the discussion we had regarding a possible relocation of the maintenance facility that involved a land swap. And it turned out that there were statutory limitations that we could not do it in the way that it had initially been presented. I started out, notwithstanding those, because we can't get around them, I actually built a little model to take a look at what are the economics there. And then Pat raised the idea, kind of ad hoc of relocating it to West Pinehurst Park. And so I took that model, and I've actually discussed it a bit with Dana in terms of the practical sides of it. And I apologize for the type font. And Shannon, I will give you a copy at the end here. This is an attempt to put at least a financial backing to something where it is a significant cost item. We're not going to do this tonight, but we could hook my laptop up, and all the numbers you see in the box in the top left can be adjusted on the fly, and you obviously get a different number. But in speaking with Dana, if we were, one of the things that has been discussed in connection with that is that we would probably borrow at least a portion of that. In this example, I've assumed 50%, but you can put any number in there. So these are the components that are involved and the things that might change over time. And normally, if you are borrowing, you tend to structure the term of the debt to equal the useful life of the facility. We typically wouldn't borrow longer than 20 years. Clearly, a new maintenance facility we would hope would have at least a 20-year useful life. So this model is actually borrowing half the proceed or half the cost at 4.25%, which I'm instructed by Dana is a reasonable representation, and looking what the present value of those costs are. Because we would presumably take the existing 7 acres and get those onto the tax rolls by selling them to, so we'd have the proceeds of sale, plus they go into the tax base. In the case of the land swap, I factored in the fact that we would lose something in that process and net that out. So this is just, I think, an example of, for some of the projects, probably not all, the sort of analysis that we could do that would help drive the decision. I'm happy to discuss the model itself. That wasn't really the point. I was just showing you that it can be done. It's the way for-profit enterprises would typically approach decisions like this. It's probably part of how the hospital took a look at what they were doing, even though they're not-for-profit. So,
Just out of curiosity, so I can understand more of this, what is the total we are borrowing? Is that 6 million?
no, that was the estimated cost,
Yeah.
and I believe this says we're borrowing 50%. So in the second, and I'm assuming that we all got this all done in 1 year, which is probably not right, but I can stretch that out. I could put in 2 years or what have you. So it's a $6 million new facility construction cost.
Mm-hmm.
When we go out and borrow the money, that in essence, that's $3 million.
That's the number, 3
put
million. I
into
see
us.
it now. Okay.
So there's $3 million. The one thing that I learned is that in the facility that we tend to use, given what is most economic for us to borrow, you know, normally we're all familiar with if we take down debt, the monthly payment is fixed and the allocation between principal and interest changes. In the case of this facility, it's not. What is fixed is the principal amount. So if you borrow $100 for 10 months, it's $100 a month. The interest is the payment and the interest amount are the variable amounts. And so what you see on the line for principal repayments, in this case, I assume that as it says that we closed this loan in December, so we only paid 1 month of principal that year, and then all the other years we're paying 12 months of principal. And then the interest expense you'll see slowly declines over time. As the balance outstanding on the loan declines, the interest amount declines. So this is not this was not the way I set it up originally, and thank you to Dana for educating me on how this actually works. I think this is an accurate representation of how that part of the economics work.
So, John, sorry to interrupt, but just kind of stepping back to the bigger picture, what you start with, I do think from a staff perspective, it is helpful if we can make decisions, and even if the decision is, okay, the answer is no, and maybe we put it off for 3 years, and then we'll reevaluate it. But just to continually kick the can down the road, like you said, isn't helpful for us or for the council. So I think us being able to make decisions will help everyone.
There could be things where we can't establish the criteria, that we feel we either don't have the information or it isn't available. That's fine.
Yeah, and
This is not a solution for everything, I'm quite sure.
And I think the Birdie process is kind of the method that has been used and probably should be used going forward. Is like, and part of that Birdie process should be a financial analysis, much like this. And
You slide this down a little more. Who has
oh,
it? You do?
on the
I just want
screen
to see
here?
what's on the page before. I was trying to,
right
there we go. Okay, thanks.
The anyway,
Okay,
I think we do analysis like this. Actually, I thought this was Dana's spreadsheet, but as we go through a Birdie process and we come before council to make decisions, something like this, or maybe exactly this, should be used for council to figure that out.
Well, I will be happy to bequeath the spreadsheet to Dana. I'm sure she could have done it, and she can probably do it better than what I did, but, I don't know, Dana, did you have any observations, or?
Yeah, I think some of what you're discussing is also included in the IAP forms that we use, so but I think part of the process that you're suggesting sounds like determining what is an IAP, what should rise to that level. But within that form, there's a risk assessment, there's sort of an assigning a 1 to 3 value or something on some sort of scale in terms of the impact it would have on, they call them customers in the form, but basically on residents, on the community in some way. Is it high impact, low cost, things like that, where there is a little bit more of an objective scale to some of it, and documenting some of that risk assessment where you're kind of talking through and determining pros and cons of the projects. And also has the financial projections. It's at 5 years within the form that we use for the IAPs, but it accounts for all of the things that you've included here. Any potential revenues, any costs, any cost savings are incorporated in that financial analysis.
Let me just make one reminder to all of us that there is an expense side to this equation. What we're doing here in this exercise is the cost side. What will it cost us as a village? What will it cost our taxpayers to do whatever it is we end up thinking we should do? But we've got to get those resources, and there's only one source for those resources, and that's our taxpayers. So I think that's just something we have to factor and balance as we make decisions, because we all, it's easy to get our eyes getting bigger than our stomach. And one of the reasons we've, over a period of time, accumulated quite a lot of money, which prompted probably that council person to say, do something with my money, was we at one point were sitting on about $20 million. It's a round figure, I forget what it was. And it prompted us for the last 3 years to reduce the tax rate. That combined with the Moore County property evaluation. So our tax rates come down, our revenues continue to be healthy, but we just need to make that balance as we figure out what do we do now, what do we postpone. I mean, many of these things have been on somewhere on the spectrum over the last 5 years, maybe longer. I mean, you can look back, the library, the archives, potential fire facilities, potential ladder truck, West Pinehurst Park. We have owned that for 23 years or 22 years, whatever it is, okay? And we've always, at least since the first time I joined the council, I always remember it, there was $1 million plug in there for a consultant to develop plans for it. It's a good idea, probably. Probably take $1 million. You were sitting on 60-something acres. But every time we were sort of forced into a decision as a council, at least the 3 years I've been on it, that always fell by the wayside. Or, as Doug alluded a little earlier, we put it out for 3 years. The parking garage, that goes back, maybe to James Walker Tufts when he first found the place, Jack. I don't know, on his birthday. But it went back, I think, at least 7 or 8 years, where I saw a figure of $5 million, some 4.5. I mean, it could have been longer. I'm not bringing this up just as for criticism. It's not critical. I am bringing it up to make us really think through that our decisions have financial consequences for our residents. And so we've got to just think of that as we go through these things. That's why birdies are good, okay? That's why actually discussing them over a period of a couple of years is a pretty good idea too, because sometimes things change, okay? I didn't see Camelot Playground. I can't recall that in the past. I meant to go look it up and I forgot to. But it's on now. And it's probably small and necessary for us to upgrade it. It's very popular. Matter of fact, I mentioned it to someone the other day. We may be upgrading that. It was a resident. And they said, oh, what are you going to do? I said, well, the wood's getting a little, rusty, and it might be, there's safer type of material. And this woman said, I love that wood. I thought, oh boy, I never thought I would get that comment back. Here I'm thinking, oh, we're going to improve it, make it even safer. I just want to let us keep in mind that factor of how we pay for these things. Not opposed to debt financing when the case can be made and it's necessary. I think it's a financing approach of last resort for a village our size.
I think, Pat, I guess I'd respond a couple ways. One is, if we're talking about taking down debt, I think your approach has more merit. And the excess funds we have now, which I think are in the land of $16 million over our required rainy day fund, and it's easy for us to think of that as our money, but it isn't our money. It was, once upon a time, it was the taxpayers' money, and it's still their money, and we're just quasi stewards of it, right? But unless we're going to do what Jeff Morgan suggested, which is to lower the tax rate to 10 cents or something like that, and consume the surplus by running, in essence, a deficit spending, we have to decide what's important and what isn't.
Yes, you're right about that.
It's $500,000 for Camelot or some larger number from some larger project. I would hope we would be more proactive. That's not to suggest we're going to make a decision on everything that's here and kick nothing down the road, but I think, as Doug said, we help staff out by saying, yeah, we really want to focus on this, or we don't. Let them focus on other things
I do think, keep this in mind though, we are also not a community that is likely to receive extra funds from the state, okay, with all the needs the state has. We don't fall into that bucket of, oh, Pinehurst, we ought to help them out with Camelot Park Playground. There are other communities that are probably more deserving in the standpoint that they don't have the resources that we have to take on projects like this. So we have to look internally into these 17 square miles.
I just want to collect the rusty wood. I'm just trying to think, that's got to be the rarest wood on earth, and we could sell that for a lot of money.
Yeah. I think one takeaway is that moving forward, staff can do a better job of analyzing, providing comprehensive feedback on projects, and help council make a decision on yes or no, are we actually going to do this? And if not, maybe we don't do Camelot Playground in 2029, but we say we're actually going to we'll reevaluate it in 2031, and then, yeah, something like that.
I think the discussion, I believe the discussion will be a very healthy exercise. I think this discussion right now is a good exercise, and John, thank you for this, and Dana, because it becomes less theoretical and more realistic when you have a piece of paper like this in front of you. So obviously we will get to this a little more specifically in the coming council meetings. Is that fair, Doug?
Yeah, I think one of the things this points out is that the let's call it list price that we have when we have a document like this, the list, is not necessarily the true cost. Some cases it would be, other cases it's not. And what we ought to be looking at is what is the true cost, greater or less than what's on this sheet, whatever it happens to be, so.
One other comment. When you said the list price, true cost, I do believe these are, I'll call them more accurate estimates than what some of the ones we had a few years ago, where we were working off numbers that, as we got closer to a decision, they shut up. And so this is, I really appreciate that, and I know it takes work to get it, because
Dana has very impressive spreadsheets that do this for us. So.
Well, the interesting thing is we have Fire Station 93 at 8.9 million there on this piece of paper, which I cannot remember where it came from, but on the other side it said major capital needs. It has 10 million, so.
well, this
there's
is,
and I used 6 in my analysis because that was the last number I remembered.
right.
I could update that quickly, so. That's it for me on this topic, but
Okay.
to be revisited.
All right, we are scheduled to go into a closed session next. So unless anyone has anything else, we'll move to do such.
I move to recess the work session and enter the closed session pursuant to NCGS 143-318.11A5 to establish or to instruct the public body staff or negotiating agents concerning the position to be taken by or on behalf of the public body in negotiating, 1, the price and other materials, terms of a contract or proposed contract for the acquisition of real property by purchase, option, exchange, or lease, or 2, the amount of compensation and other material terms of an employment contract or proposed employment contract.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Please clear the room. Thank you. And we'll group and form.